For everyone that doesn't know who I am, my name is Becky De Silva and I'm the chair of Women in Surgery. And we've been having these Women in Surgery leadership webinars for a year. And we'll be continuing them again this year, thanks to our very generous sponsors who are Medtronic, as well as Free Capital. And so we're really grateful that they are sponsoring this so that we can put this on. And it's fantastic to see such a great turnout every day. We know that people are going to probably watch this later when it's on YouTube, but it's lovely to have everybody on live. I just want to start off by acknowledging that I'm chairing this meeting from the lands of the Darug and the Guringai people, who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I pay respects to their elders past, present, and future, and I pay respects to the elders and past, present, and future in all the lands where you are. As a binational college, RACS acknowledges and respects Naiwi Maori as a tangata whenua of Aotearoa and is committed to upholding the principles of Tia Tiriti o Waitangi, fostering the college's relationship with Maori, supporting Maori fellows and trainees, and striving to improve the health of all Maori people. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I am really thrilled to have two exceptional female surgeons today speaking to us. And we're going to hear lots of wisdom, I think, from both of them. Starting off, we've got Dr. Deborah Verran, who obtained her FRACS in general surgery in New Zealand, followed by undertaking further transplant surgical training in North America for 3 years. She worked as an abdominal transplant surgeon in Sydney for 23 years prior to transitioning into undertaking predominantly academic and mentoring activities. She's done a lot of work on gender equity, and she is a supporter of the US not-for-profit Physician Just Equity for the last 5 years, and she's one of the research committee co-chairs for this. And she's presented at last year's ASC, and I'm really looking forward to some of the work that she's been doing for us, and to hear what she has to say. Our other speaker is Professor Margaret Schnitzler, who's a colorectal surgeon down the road from me at Royal North Shore Hospital. She graduated in medicine at the University of Sydney and trained in surgery at Royal North Shore, and then did clinical fellowships in Michigan and Toronto. She is the professor in surgery at the University of Sydney. She's the co-deputy head of the Sydney Medical School, and she's also head of the Northern Sydney. Oh, sorry, my thing, which has just closed. Sydney Precinct, and within the North Sydney Local Health District, which is where I work, she's also the chair of the Advancing Women in Medical Leadership Group. And some really great work has been coming out of that group. And so I'm really pleased that she's going to talk to us and hopefully inspire some of you to maybe bring this to your health districts, and see what kind of work might be possible where you're working. So we're going to start off with Deborah's talk. So Deborah, do you want to share your screen? And
Yep. I'll just slides are just graphics. So just for the sake of expediency. So what's happened over the last 5 years is that I've undertaken a number of activities, all of which have helped inform me as the best way to go about supporting individuals who are finding themselves either struggling in the workplace or, more importantly, facing workplace conflict. And if we can go to the second slide, Monique. Thanks. Okay, and these activities have all involved around collaborating with like-minded individuals, undertaking various types of research, including putting data into research type manuscripts, undertaking advocacy via social media, which I might add was a lot easier 5 years ago than it is now, and then ultimately mentoring and supporting people who are facing either career attrition or career loss, including in this part of the world and also in the United States. Next slide, thanks. And through all these activities, what this has enabled me to do is to assist individual surgeons who have found themselves in real trouble in their workplace. Next slide, please. So how this all started, all this collaboration, particularly on the international stage, is that back in time, it was around 2018, and I think I was on long service leave at the time, I saw an expression of interest put out via Twitter, via the nib journal, and they were looking for female surgeons to write perspective type pieces or narratives of their experiences in the workplace. And the theme of the topic was going to be Me Too in surgery. And that's how I first came across Pringle Miller, because she was the executive editor for this particular collection. And what you had to do is put in an abstract of about 300 words. So I put in an abstract, which I thought encapsulated my career, warts and all, although I did have to sanitize it. So I couldn't talk about individuals, place, time, or lawyers. And I sent it off, and I honestly didn't think I had a chance, because I thought that there would be lots of submissions, particularly from the United States, and because they would have so many submissions that they would be able to just, select the handful that they needed to publish, which was about 20, 25, and I probably wouldn't hear much else except that my abstract had not been accepted. And I was surprised a couple of months later, I was told the abstract was accepted, and I then had to put in a full manuscript into the nib journal. Around about that time that was happening, I was also approached by Frontiers in Surgery to act as the chief editor for a topic, a research topic, which had the theme of gender equity in surgery. And so I set about finding some co-editors who could assist me with putting the research topic together, and then putting out expressions of interest, and then finding reviewers for manuscripts and so on. And as a result of the initial piece that was put into the nib journal, I ended up then supporting Pringle Miller when she established the organisation Physician Just Equity in about 2019. And we've been collaborating ever since, which is about 4.5 years. And the image is of Pringle and I on the western part of Lake Wakatipu up a hill, which we've just hiked up because we both like hiking. Next slide. Thanks. So just a little bit of background about the nib journal. So the nib journal was published back in 2019. There's a number of narratives that have been put into this journal. Some of them are absolutely excoriating to read. Two of the narratives had to be put in by anonymous participants because even to this day, they were worried about retaliation, particularly in the workplace, if they attached their name to what was a sensitive publication in a journal. As a result of that, of course, Pringle was so impressed with my narrative that she got in touch with me around about the time it was being published and said, I was really impressed with your narrative. That's what's included, even though you were the only international surgeon. And I had to tell her at that stage that it was actually sanitised. I'd had to sanitise it because there's been a number of things going on in my workplace that I actually couldn't talk about. And some of that was actually due to a legal action, and that I'd obtained legal closure on one occasion, which meant there were some things that could never be mentioned again. So as a result of that, we kept in touch, and it was only about 3 or 4 months after the Me Too collection was published that Pringle contacted me and asked me whether I thought it was a good idea that she establish an organisation in the United States that would assist physicians and surgeons who were getting into trouble in their workplace, not because they were incompetent and not because they had mental health issues or had problems with their physical health, but actually because they were having conflict in the institution, whether it be with co-workers, seniors, administrators, whoever. And this was endangering their career. And from where I sat and from what I'd been aware of, particularly in recent years, I thought this was an excellent idea. In parallel, the Frontiers in Surgery gender equity initiative kicked off the research topic. And as this kicked off, this was early 2020, And of course, as you all know, we weren't very far into 2020 before something called a pandemic came along, and that created a number of challenges. So we initially had 30 research groups send in expressions of interest to submit manuscripts. We ended up with 10. We had to delay the final manuscript submission deadline on several occasions. I found at times that people went missing in the Frontiers office because they were off sick with COVID. A number of the researchers got COVID. I used to receive these excoriating A4 page emails from people about how they couldn't get their submission in on time and could I give them an extension, and who else in the family had COVID, and it was just really something to behold. But in the end, we ended up with 10 manuscripts, and that was a reasonable number for a topic like this. And I think all of us who were involved were fairly pleased with the result. And just as an aside, there was a manuscript published out of Australia, and Jasmina Kevrick was the first author. Some of you may know who Jasmina Kevrick is. She's actually presented the data from this manuscript at RACS meetings. Next slide, thanks. I also was involved with collaborating with like-minded individuals around the same time here within Australia. The first collaboration ended up in a publication in an overseas journal about the gender ratios of editors and chief editors of Australasian medical and surgical journals. We were unable to get that manuscript published here in Australia. Significant barriers to publication. I mean, you would have thought that this would have been a manuscript that would have been of interest to a wide audience, but clearly that wasn't the case of a number of the editors or even the reviewers of journals here in Australia. What we discovered is that there were a very low proportion of chief editors of Australasian medical and surgical journals, but also that the wider editorial boards, the makeup of them, the gender ratios, didn't reflect the gender ratios of the wider population of doctors who were the cohort of individuals in that particular specialty. And we were able to ascertain that by comparing the ratios of the gender ratios of the editorial boards with those of data held by MHSM for the relevant craft specialties. The second manuscript was published in ACHM, and this was where we looked at the gender ratios of individuals in public hospital boards, on public hospital boards. And we were able to show that there was some difference between the jurisdictions and the gender ratios. Alarmingly, New South Wales had the worst statistics, both for the wider boards as well as the chair of the board. As an aside, we also noted that if there were doctors on the boards, they tended to be males. There were very few female doctors who made it onto boards, and that the majority of females who were on boards tended to be nurses or social workers. Next slide, thanks. So, having managed to get all of that out of the way, Physician Just Equity started providing a counselling service to both physicians and surgeons who approached it, who were in trouble in their workplace. And this was able to be achieved mainly by a number of us promoting PJE by social media, predominantly by Twitter back then, along with Pringle Miller and some of her colleagues promoting it, and also PJE establishing a Twitter account. So very quickly around the United States, by a combination of social media and just word of mouth, this translated into a steady stream of people approaching the organisation. As a result, as the organisation gained experience with dealing with these physicians and surgeons who were in trouble, and understanding A, what it was that had got them into trouble, and then B, trying to navigate a path with them to some form of resolution, clearly the corporate knowledge on this continued to grow. And it was important to get the PJE out there to publish on our experience. And initially we published in the General Surgical News, and I appeared on that publication because we had to have a conversation every time we went to try and publish something about whether it was safe for individuals to have their names associated with publications. And to be quite honest, it wasn't safe for a number of the individuals associated with PJE to have their names on some of these publications, which gives you an idea of how a number of the issues that we're dealing with are very sensitive, even back in 2020, 2022. We published on our first experience with peer support in the Journal General Internal Medicine. And that initial experience was of 35 peers, and of note, 86% of those were female, 63% of them were non-white. And the major finding was that the three predominant issues that we were being confronted with, that the peers were bringing to PJE requesting support, were discrimination, retaliation in the workplace, and harassment. Next slide, thanks. So again, through collaborating with PJE, there was a subgroup of us who decided to take a hypothesis that Pringle Miller had through to a research project. And Pringle's hypothesis was that in workplaces where microaggressions were frequent and pretty well out of control, that this would lead to some form of impact on surgeons' careers, or have some kind of impact. So we had to come up with a survey tool. So we had to generate a survey tool. That took a little bit of time because there was no, at that point in time, no decent survey tool that would fulfill our needs. And so we had to take parts of the validated tool and combine it with some other questions. And that was then put through some beta testing in an institution in the United States. And then we had the survey ready to go. We had to look at then how best to distribute it. We didn't want to just distribute it within one organisation, i.e. hospital, because up to that point in time, all of the microaggression surveys had mainly been done within hospitals or within subgroups of professional societies. So we aimed pretty high with this. We wanted it to go across the United States and potentially to as many surgeons as possible. So we approached the ACS and asked them if we could have it go up on their communities. Initially, we had a significant amount of pushback, but just through some gentle kind of politicking and people being informed that we're not going to use the ACS's name in vain should we publish, they agreed to it. So the survey went up onto the ACS community's website. It was up there for a number of the communities' websites, because if you know about the ACS communities, you might know that they have a number of communities which are kind of subgroups, and these are kind of chat sites. So it went up, and then what happened was that there were all these interesting comments being made in response to the survey. Some of them were negative. So Christine Heisler, who was the lead on this, used to screenshot the comments and send them to me, because I wasn't a member of the ACS communities, and I'd patiently look at them. And I mean, I wasn't too surprised that we're getting pushback from both genders, actually, and just would patiently respond that just don't respond. The response was don't respond. Because there were a number of people who just didn't believe we should even be surveying about this. And then there were others who thought that, microaggressions just didn't occur. We had comments that individuals that never witnessed a microaggression in the workplace. And I used to say to Christine every time this happened, they must be so lucky. I feel happy for them that they, work in Nirvana. This is translated into the results being published. The first major manuscript that's been published is in AJOG. Next slide, thanks. And this was published last year. So the first tranche of data was to just look at the demographics of the individuals who were reporting that they were experiencing microaggressions. And you can see that the survey went out to about 377 people who responded. About 2/3 of them experienced microaggressions. What we found is that the female surgeons, the younger surgeons, people who are fellowship trained, and individuals working in academia were more likely to experience microaggressions. We also discovered that those who said that they were experiencing frequent microaggressions were more likely to say that they would be less likely to undertake a surgical career again. So that was the first analysis we did, looking at the demographics of the responders. We then looked to see whether or not the surgeons who were experiencing frequent microaggressions this translated to any impact on their career. And what we discovered again was that for those who reported experiencing frequent microaggressions, it was who the perpetrator was of the microaggressions that they were stating was a problem mattered. So if the perpetrator was someone who was senior to them, i.e. a supervisor, then this was more likely to translate into the surgeon changing jobs. And when they changed jobs, this was more likely to a lesser position. Interestingly enough, there was no difference between the surgeons who did or did not report microaggressions as to then what happened to their career. But again, the surgeons who said they was experiencing habitual microaggressions, i.e. frequent microaggressions, were more likely to say they would not choose a surgical career again. Next slide, thanks. And then finally, the third analysis that we've performed to date on the data, we have got a heck of a lot of data. We're still analysing it. And the previous analysis I mentioned with the career outcomes, along with this analysis, these are both published abstracts in the Journal of the American College of Surgeons, as they were both presented at meetings last year. But finally, this is the analysis that we undertook to see whether or not what kind of reporting mechanisms surgeons utilised in response to experiencing microaggressions. And I might add that they were experiencing microaggressions from pretty well everyone in the workplace, whether it be supervisors, co-workers, trainees, other staff in the healthcare system, or patients. And on the left-hand side is the informal reporting mechanisms, which is to report either to a colleague or a mentor, and they were frequently used. And then, interesting enough, then look across the right-hand slide and look at the green bars. These are the number of times or percentage of times that the surgeons actually confronted the perpetrator of the microaggressions directly. And that's important, I think, because I think frequently we get told, oh, people don't do anything in response to the microaggressions. But in fact, what we're discovering is, in fact, surgeons do. They actually do try and tackle the perpetrators. And then in the middle are the number of times that surgeons utilised formal reporting mechanisms, and that varied a bit depending on which avenue they opted to go down. Next slide, thanks. So with all this knowledge that I've been accruing, I've been called on in this part of the world to assist in mentoring surgeons, but also to provide support. And this has included providing support to individuals who are facing workplace conflict. And this has been cases where individuals have faced serious workplace conflict, leading to career disruption or career loss. One of the problems we have in this part of the world is that legal action has frequently resulted in NDAs or similar being lodged by the employer. So some of these surgeons are not able to talk to people about it. There's one surgeon that I did support who ultimately signed an NDA, which is ironic because I heard about everything every step of the way right up till the time they signed the NDA, but they're no longer able to talk to people about it. The problem with all of this, of course, is little is known, or little is discoverable about this, and so it's kind of, it's like an elephant in the room. People know about it, but we have no idea of the extent or what some of the outcomes are because there's just nothing in the public domain. In parallel, of course, my ongoing involvement with PJE, where I'm helping provide advice to the team as they accrue more and more experience and data, has also helped inform my knowledge on this, because basically the tactics that are being used are the same in this part of the world as in the United States. The outcomes differ a little bit at times, and the actors are a bit different. Some of the organisational actors are a bit different, but yeah, the tactics are the same. In parallel, I've also provided advice via social media at times. Next slide, thanks. So this is a testimonial from a US peer. I couldn't use any testimonials locally because things are too sensitive. So I have permission to share this from PJE. So this peer, I think, what they state in writing encapsulates, I think, very neatly what people are going through. This is someone who reported a clinical issue, and then it obviously involved a physician who was their former supervisor, and they then retaliated by reporting this peer. and they were saying that the peer was being racially and gender biased. And so they've been going through an investigation. It's gone on for 6 months. They've received no support within the institution. They've spent thousands on legal fees. They feel isolated and alone because their colleagues have been questioned about their activities in the workplace, including ethics. And of course, they get told not to discuss it with anyone. They've lost the joy in work. They're finding they're having increasing trouble interacting with people. Meanwhile, they're watching as more clinical problems accrue, but people in the workplace are now too afraid to report because of retaliation. So you can imagine that, how they're feeling. They're just feeling like they've just got this enormous weight on them and they can't talk to anyone. And they feel so blind trying to navigate it. And hence they would love advice on how to navigate all of this and not end up walking away entirely from the clinical arena. So that is what we often see at PJE, something along these lines, which is the initial approach. And then, of course, it has to be managed according to what are the issues. Next slide, thanks. So this is just a little bit of, this is from PJE, just I think the thing that is most important here is the number of peers supported. I think that's the take-home message here if you just look at this slide. And PJE is currently supporting about 30 to 40 people a year. This translates into formal meetings, i.e. where they get a group of peers from PJE to have a Zoom session with the physician or surgeon in question about 2/3 of the time. The other third of the time there's less formal advice provided, but some kind of advice provided. So that's kind of the experience that PJE is accruing. PJE has now become a partner organisation with a couple of other like-minded organisations in the States, one of which is NASM in 2024. Next slide, thanks. I might okay, can I still have a few more minutes, Peggy? Yeah. I think it's important to talk about this. I was going to talk about what's happened in the United States with weaponisation of DEI, but we'll cut it off after the slide. So what are some of the tactics that have been used, and that includes in this part of the world, and how can this translate into your career? Well, some of the tactics used include internal reporting mechanisms being utilised or weaponised against individuals. These individuals have to find that they're dealing with complaints, they're dealing with retaliation in the workplace. This translates into less clinical practice opportunities. The asterisk indicates that this is occurring in this part of the world. Where there's no asterisk is where it's not necessarily occurring in this part of the world. Other organisational processes are utilised to push an individual out of the organisation. So in the United States, what that involves is generating reports that go to the MPDB, which is the National Practitioner Database. And unfortunately, if those are negative reports, that's then in the public domain, which means if the physician or surgeon tries to leave their place of employment, it's very difficult to get employment elsewhere because there's something in the public domain that has been lodged, which has a number of negative statements about you in it. And we've certainly seen this through PJ as being a problem. Other tactics are backroom conversations that involve informal disciplinary actions. You're served with a suspension notice, including whilst on leave, or you're served with a termination notice. And what does this translate into? The career trajectory falters and may never be regained. Reputational damage, which may never be regained. Your career is maintained by moving institutions. You move into a non-clinical role. You have to cease clinical practice with the concordant loss of income, and this may be permanent, so it's associated with a lowering of your income. And then there are other impacts on the individuals, including personally and socially. And one of the things that we've noted through PJE is PTSD is a real issue. We haven't published yet on that, but we would dearly like to undertake some research on that. And I'll cut it off at that.
Thank you so much for that, Deborah. I think if there's anyone in the audience who's having something similar happening, it's really great to sort of see this data, because when it's happening to you, you do kind of sometimes feel like you're the only person that it's happening to. And it's really reassuring to know that it happens everywhere and it happens to lots of people. And that, there's somebody that can help you. We might leave questions to the end because I think there's probably going to be a few questions that people are sort of um, thinking about in their head. I think just before I go on to Margaret, I'm going to do, hopefully this will work. I'm going to do my ad break, which hopefully will work. So hopefully you will be able to see my slide because I should have started the first one. If you can't see, oh, good. I think you can see them. So Medtronic, who are sponsoring this, just wanted me to talk about briefly about pelvic venous disease to make sure that because we have a whole bunch of female surgeons and we tend to see a lot of female patients, that we just are aware that patients with chronic pelvic pain, that this is a diagnosis and that pelvic venous insufficiency can be very painful. The symptoms that they might complain of is pelvic pain that's greater than 6 months of duration, pain while having intercourse, dysmenorrhea, heaviness, so they feel like a dragging in their pelvis when they're standing up. When they're pregnant, they might have vulval varices and they can have ovarian pain tenderness, point tenderness. So if you have patients who have this, consider sending them to a vascular surgeon. That's my Medtronic ad. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Siobhan Blewett, who owns Frey Capital. So Siobhan is actually the chair of the RACS investment committee, and she does that pro bono. And she was employed at a big firm, and she decided to leave and strike out on her own because there was a few gender equity issues. And she is doing very well. And there's a few people probably who might be on here who have been investing with her. And so she'll be actually talking to us in a further webinar in the future about financial issues for surgeons and how we can sort of look at ensuring our financial stability in the future. Right, so those are my ads for our sponsors, and I just had to laugh. I hope Sharon's still awake because she's in Morocco in bed. And I'm gonna hand over to Margaret to give her talk. Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks for inviting me. And I guess what I'll be talking about is perhaps something slightly different to Deborah's presentation, but hopefully it'll be a complementary. And I'm going to be sharing with you some of our experience in the Advancing Women in Medical Leadership group in our local health district. And yeah, just thought this might be a bit of a stimulus perhaps for some of you to think about things you could potentially do in your own clinical environments, or perhaps share ideas that you're already doing that we could learn from you. So I'm just going to give a bit of a snapshot of some of our activities and hopefully leave a good amount of time for any discussion. So Northern Sydney Local Health District, for those who don't know it, and I think that's most of you are not within our district, it's quite a large part of Northern Sydney, occupying right up to the Central Coast, and we have about a million people and around 12,000 employees in the district. And the group that I'm going to be talking about was actually established by our Chief Executive, Deb Wilcox, whom some of you might know, who's now at Central Sydney, and she was at the Ministry, and this was something she set up. It's really important that it's had very strong support from our executive, from the Chief Executive and the board. At the moment, we have 57 members and growing, and it's a very inclusive group. And we meet every 2 to 3 months. We had a meeting today. So when we first set up the group, I guess there was a bit of general discussion about what we wanted to do, and there were 5 working groups that were formed. One was that we needed to know a bit more about what was actually going on, and we realised that we needed data, and I think that's been one of our strengths, and I'm going to share the data or some of the data we've collected, and hopefully, be interested to hear how this sort of marries up with what people might know in their own areas. We wanted to consider what is it that stops or enables women from progressing into leadership positions. We wanted to run some events. We want to talk a little bit about how to support women through their career, some of the pathways, and I guess looking at the career pipeline, and Deborah's mentioned that. And we wanted to see how we were going with meeting the New South Wales Health Women in Leadership target. And I'm not going to talk more about the targets now, but I will just tell you that New South Wales Health has defined targets for women in leadership. It doesn't refer specifically to medical leadership. And because there's such a heavy female dominant workforce with our nursing and our health colleagues, we easily meet this target, which is 50%. Now, we have set targets in our district for senior medical women, and they've been accepted by our board and sort of enacted. But in fact, we already meet them. They were pretty modest targets, which were 40% women, 40% men, and 20% any gender. So I guess we've met that overall target, but we've got work to do in some departments, and I'm going to show you a bit about that. So here's a little bit of the data that we collect, and I'm going to show you a few different specialties. But in the circle at the top, we've got men in blue and women in red. So you can see that in our district, we're 41% women and 59% men. Now, this data actually was from October 23. I just got in the last week the updated data, which is for now, but it hasn't all been verified, so I haven't presented it. But we are collecting and adding to this annually. And the percentage up there is the increase or the decrease in the previous sort of 12 to 18 months. And then there's a variety of other bits of data, which I won't go into in great detail, but perhaps on the top left, you can see that we've broken it down by VMO and staff specialist and senior staff specialist. We've also looked at the age mix of the each department. So I'm just going to run through a variety of different departments really quickly, focusing perhaps on the surgical ones. But some of the big departments, anaesthesia for us, interestingly, it's more male dominated than we might perhaps have expected. In emergency medicine, it's pretty, well, it's I guess 43 to 57-ish, and a slight decrease in the previous 18 months. O&G, where I understand from my colleagues now, close to 80% of trainees are female. We are at pretty close to 50-50 in our senior medical staff. And I guess we expect that will increase with the pipeline of training. Pediatrics is another quite heavily female-dominated department, as you might imagine. But here, look at cardiology, which I think is kind of interesting for a medical specialty where more than 3/4 of the staff are male. And it's not a huge department, but 34 cardiologists in Northern Sydney and only 8 women. Endocrinology, it's close to the opposite. I guess you could make some comment about some of the procedural specialties perhaps being a little bit more like surgery, and we can think about reasons why the proportion of men is higher there. Radiology, it's about 50-50. And now we come to our surgical specialties. Now, cardiothoracic is a small department, only 7, but there has never been a female cardiothoracic department, a surgeon in Northern Sydney Local Health District. General surgery, where, and some others will probably know, but I think we're about 35% of trainees are female. Is that about right? Does anyone know? Yeah, Pecky's sort of nodding. So we're kind of close to that. But one of the things that I think, and I've been, qualified as a general surgeon 35 to 40-ish years ago, a long time, and kept being told it's going to increase, and it's been a very slow increase. And it, when we look at our proportion here in our district, we haven't seen a sort of an increase, and that number hasn't increased with our latest data either. The smaller specialties, neurosurgery, 2 women, orthopedics, quite a big department. Again, Royal North Shore is our major tertiary hospital, has not ever had a female orthopedic surgeon. plastics, small department, urology. So all quite similar. Vascular. Now, Pecky, you are a vascular surgeon in the district, but I think at Hornsby you get considered in the general surgery numbers, which is why you don't appear here. So this is only really the North Shore Vascular Department, but again, no women. So if you look at surgery all up, we're at 16%, which I think is really disappointing. It went down in that 18 months, and I looked at the data today with our next 18 months, and we've gone down another 0.3%. So that's where we need to do the work, not necessarily in our total workforce, although, of course, there's work to be done there too. 50% of our medical students are female. You know, we should be having 50% of our senior medical workforce being female. But obviously the training numbers are going to influence that. And one other thing that we've been doing in the department, which I can't publish or can't present here, is that we now record all the applicants for positions by gender. So who applies, and then who was successful and who was unsuccessful. And now we've got data on, you know, close to, it's over 800 appointments have been made in the last 2.5 years. So it's starting to be quite useful data. And without going into any details, the proportion of women who are appointed, if you apply for a senior medical staff position in our district, approximately 45% of female applicants are appointed and around 35% of male applicants are appointed. So at least on that metric, we are seeing, you know, no difference, or if anything, slight increase in the proportion of women who are being appointed to positions. But of course, the total number of female applicants is still less. So that's just a bit of our data to show you what we're collecting, and we disseminate this to our heads of department and to other, you know, bodies, the directors of medical services, the executives, so that the data's out there and people can look at it and make of it what they will. Okay, moving on to some of the other things that we have been doing. We've tried to increase visibility of our female leaders, and we actually, if you look, I haven't put the website link here, but you can just put Advancing Women in Medical Leadership in Northern Sydney, and you'll get a little page that comes up that you can listen to Pecky's fabulous interview here and some of our other strong female leaders, which I think is great. But in fact, when you look at it, people don't tend to watch videos on websites as much as we might hope they would. So, yeah, we have to, I guess, be circumspect about how useful this is. I mean, I've watched all of them and found them really good, but yeah, it's one of a series of measures that we can profile and demonstrate the great work that our female colleagues are doing in the district. Now, one thing that we did that has been really successful is that we've run a series of masterclasses this year. We ran 3. They were all very short. This was the longest one, 1 hour. You can see they all ran at lunchtime. We had 2 speakers, typically one person from within the district and one external speaker. There was a quick lunch and a short and sharp 45-minute class, and they were really well attended and well received. We had literally hundreds of people attend each, which, as anyone who's tried to organise kind of a seminar or a meeting in a health district knows, that's difficult. But yeah, we had really good attendance, and the in-room bookings were generally oversubscribed, and we then had an online audience as well. So this one was on effective chairing of meetings, and I was one of the speakers there. The second one was managing challenging behaviours, and Danette is online. Hi, Danette. And Danette, who's published on this topic, gave a fabulous presentation up at Hornsby Hospital. And then the most recent one in December was one of our senior academic physicians, Carol Pollock, and a chief executive from outside the health district, Leonie King, and they did a whole thing on building careers and leading teams. So they've all been really well received. And another thing that we did in our first year was I'll just show you this, because this is what we're planning to do this year. We had a meeting today about this, but these were some of the ideas. Again, just if people are thinking about doing things in their own districts, maybe these are some things that our attendees at these suggested these for future masterclasses. So I'll just put them up there too. I mean, maybe this is what you're talking about, Deb, counselling and confidential advice. We decided we're not going to do anything on work-life balance, how to be assertive. Yes, some of these things that specific organisational skills, and people were interested in this, how to write a good business case, how to set a meeting agenda, some of those more process-related things. So these are some of the things we're going to choose from this year. And yeah, we did run a conference. Now, I'm not sure how well this is going to play, but I'm going to try, because, with the sound, I'll see if this is going to work. It's a little video just to show you. We had Kerry Chant as one of our speakers. Sorry.
Margaret warned us that it's going to be a bit laggy, so just be a bit patient.
It does look like it's playing, but I don't think it's going to play sufficiently well. I'll just try the next one, but see if we have any more luck.
I give the analogy of a leaky pipeline.
We could hear that briefly.
Yeah, I won't persist. I did try this earlier and it got to work, but it's always an issue with running video. But anyway, we had Kerry Chant, who is the New South Wales Chief Medical Officer, and this speaker here is Marlene Kanga, who was president of the International Federation of Engineers, and they both gave really inspiring presentations. And we had a couple of panels. It was just like a Friday afternoon for about 3 hours with a lunch before. It was really well attended. We had over 200 people attend and got lots of really positive feedback. So that's something we're planning to do again in 2026.
So if you have a pipeline that's got a I give.
And the other thing that I just want to briefly share that we've done is we ran this project on barriers and enablers, and we had really good support from our district with some funding to have consultants come in and run this as a kind of research project with a variety of focus groups, interviews, and a survey. And they collated a really comprehensive report. And they told us this is what's working well in our district. And again, I'll just let people read that themselves. But it was nice to see that they were happy about the role of the conference. They liked the monitoring of the gender of applicants for positions. It's good that they identified the support of male medical leaders. We have a number of male members of our group, and including our board chair, who is a man who's extremely supportive and attends all our meetings. So these were some positives, but of course there were many areas where additional work is to be done, and these were some of the things that people identified. And again, I'll just kind of let people read through, but we are, in each of these categories, we've identified some strategies, and we are developing, this is our next little body of work for this year, is addressing some of the things that have come out of this research and working on things that we can do. Probably our main thing is going to be on more visible representation of female role models, and we're looking at particularly creating better ways for women to take on leadership in departments, be heads of departments, and a few other ideas. And this is just a paper that was produced that can be shared, but it's a really nice detailed report with a lot of data in it. But this has been, again, widely circulated to our leadership so that they know about the issues that are important to us as senior medical women in the district. So I guess that's just a little taster of some of the things we've done, some events, a little bit of sort of research, a lot of data collection, setting some targets, and really trying to increase visibility of the women in our district. And I think we're getting some traction, and I'm happy to report back at some stage in the future. But yeah, very keen to hear anyone else who's got ideas or people might be doing something similar in their own districts. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right. Well, this is the time for everyone, if they've got burning questions, to get their hands up and let us know. I'm just going to kick off and just ask a couple of questions. I want to start off, Deborah, with you. I was just curious with your organisation and with the physicians and surgeons who are asking for help, is there a gender bias? Like, is there more women asking for help? Is it equal? What actually is the breakdown of people that are having issues?
For PJE, it's still holding true. Looking at data year in, year out, that it's about 80% female who are seeking support. And here in this part of the world, I would say the statistics are similar. I mean, I have supported, a male surgeon this last year, so yeah, the ratio is similar here.
And I guess within your organisation, just with the current, I mean, we've got to kind of mention it, with the current political state in the USA, with the fact that we seem to be having a leadership that is in favour of discrimination and retaliation.
Mm-hmm.
Does your organisation, what are they trying to do to try and combat what seems like a really adversarial community or sort of?
Yep. So, I mean, I was going to mention this if I talk longer, but basically everything has changed in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And some people have said to me, oh, it's like a hand grenade being thrown. But actually, I liken this to a atom bomb being set off. But right now, we're all looking at the mushroom cloud going, whoa, we're not sure yet how much radiation toxicity there's going to be, but clearly some, and there's already some casualties. So what, and if you were on X this last couple of years, you would have seen this coming. X was weaponized by the right wing and by its owner. You could see it coming, and there was data being published out of the United States that was very indicative that there was big pushback going on against DEI, particularly in Republican voters who were white. So who were most against DEI, according to the Pew data, were white males and females towards the end of last year, whereas black females were most in favour of DEI. So what we've already had to do as PJE as an organisation, you can imagine, we've had a few crisis meetings. First thing we had to do is we recognised that our mission statement, which has got DEI in it, is going to have to be reworked. And we're going to focus on justice moving forward, justice and fairness. Okay, so we have to rewrite all our public-facing documents. The second thing, we had to move to protect anyone who had intersected with the PJE X account, because what became apparent is that there were individuals who had intersected with PJE, some of whom actually still had either NIH grants, and one of them actually still works in the NIH. I'm not sure that's going to hold true for the next couple of weeks, but these people, the PJE account had retweeted their tweets, etc., and we realised that X was being weaponised, and I saw this happen 2 weeks ago, in that there were individuals on X who were promoting that if anyone saw anything with DEI on X, to report those individuals to the new email address that had been set up, which is DEIA squiggly A something. And this was actively being promoted by the owner of X's acolytes. So we can see that everything's changed. But in the last 24 hours in the United States, there has been legal action launched in Delaware, in the state of Delaware, by 2 organisations that have combined, Democracy Foundation and the American Association of University Professors, because they're trying to push back against this and say that under the Constitution, that there shouldn't be discrimination of people using this kind of terminology, that this is actually discriminatory. And I think it is. I think it's discriminatory to say that anyone who has worked in DEI or is using the terminology, is a lesser person, which is what the Trump organisation are trying to indicate. And that was very obvious in the executive order that he signed, which I've read. He singled out the medical profession as one of the professions had, been undertaking all these, he called them illegal DEI activities. So yeah, everything's changed. Just when I think I'm going to have a quiet life, suddenly something like this comes along. But yeah, everything's changed. And I would say to people, if you've got social media accounts, just look closely, particularly if you want to travel to the United States. You might have to think of deleting them even. What I am seeing, I used to pick people up from X to, saying they were looking for assistance because they had workplace conflict. That pretty well dried up as soon as the new owner took it over and fiddled with the algorithms. So now I pick up people via Reddit. Okay, there's a lot of people on Reddit, and that actually holds true here in Australia. You should ask your juniors where they go. I can tell you the Australian junior doctors are on Reddit. Everyone's under a pseudonym, okay, so that's how people get away with this. But I pick people up from Reddit who are based in the United States when they say they're facing workplace conflict, etc., and I, give them information about PJE, and some of them have contacted PJE as a result. So that's my thoughts on where things are at right now.
Well, I know I was joking earlier that I am a DEI hire, so um, that was a joke. Anyway,
Can I just say, Becky, on that, as I said, we had a meeting of our Women in Leadership group today, and we are emboldened rather than cowed. And, I think that obviously a lot of this is happening in the US, but as Deb says, it's social media and stuff, it's an international move, but certainly there's a feeling in our group that we're going to press on strongly with our DEI initiatives, and that's what we'll continue to call them. And but I mean, I know it's a different environment and our jobs are not a threat yet. But until that happens, or even if that happens, I think, we'll be powering ahead.
absolutely. I think Danette has got a different question, perhaps.
A question and a comment as well regarding, and I think it dovetails nicely into some of the issues that have already been raised. But I can't stress enough how important it is for, women to take a seat at the table. And, that may be, seemingly like a not really important table when you start off, but, you take a seat at that not seemingly important table, and then you get invited to a bigger table and a bigger table. And that's where you can start to implement change. I mean, coming back to the, addressing gender inequity with respect to hiring, I mean, just to, relate a personal story of a hiring panel that I was part on. We had, 3 applicants, all, very qualified for the position. 2 of the applicants were male, 1 of the applicants was female. One of the male applicants who had a decent research, portfolio might have pushed him a few points ahead of some of the other applicants, but interviewed very terribly, and communication was a big part of the role that we were hiring for. And the female applicant interviewed spectacularly, like practically flawless. And old mate, surgeons on the table was like, oh yeah, I know old mate, he didn't answer the questions very well, but he's a good operator, he'll be great for the team. You should, hire old mate who interviewed terribly. But I said, well, okay, we've got 3 applicants, they're all very qualified, someone's got to do this, that, and that, communication's a big part of the job. And I said, I just simply said, I've got a gender inequity and balance in my department, and the female candidate, performed excellently, is suitably qualified, and I'm hiring, I think the candidate I'm recommending for this position is the female. Now, none of the men would have said that. And no one came back to me with any sort of, oh, but, that's, unfair or anything like that. The female candidate, got appointed, subsequently also got, consultant of the year in her first year at the facility. So clearly was, spectacular in the role. But I just can't stress enough that, working your way, like I said, starting at a small table, moving to a bigger table, and just calling it out, when you are invited, if you are invited to be on a selection panel, I think some people think that, that the token, I have to have the token female on the panel to make sure that, HR is happy, but use that opportunity to, push forward a female candidate. Obviously, we're not trying to, I don't want to have, positive discrimination in the sense just appointing a female because, if they're appropriately qualified and there is a gender imbalance, then use it as an opportunity and address it at that. It may not always work, but I think that's the voice that we need to have at these tables that we get invited to. I'm very lucky. I work at an LHD where leaders are appointed not because they're the next old white man in line for the throne, and I've tried to use that opportunity to address difficult behaviours in the workplace, gender inequity, and don't get me wrong, it's been tough, and I've had vexatious complaints. I've had vexatious HCCC complaints about me, although it has restored having come through some of that stuff, it has restored my faith in the process. It hasn't been fun, but I'm very committed to, calling, these behaviours out and addressing this inequity.
Thanks, Danette. So for those of you who don't know, Danette is the Deputy Chair of New South Wales FRACS, and she's also the Clinical Director of Surgery for the Western Sydney LHD, which is Westmead, Blacktown and Mount Druitt, which is filled. It's one of the hospitals where I did my training. It's one of the hospitals in that area where I quit one of my surgical training schemes. So it's definitely an area with issues. I'm just about to go into darkness because my husband has set our blinds to close automatically.
Oh, up and put the light on.
Because he's a stay-at-home dad, and these are the kind of things that he does in his spare time is make everything electronic. Linda, do you have a question while I go put the lights on?
I don't know how to unmute myself.
You are on. We can hear you.
Yeah. All right. Good. So, yes. So I will say I was actually in Canada the day Trump was inaugurated at an orthopedic foot and ankle meeting. And I did ask several of the organizing committee what they thought about some of the DI issues, because the Foot and Ankle Society has raised that as a priority to create diverse, and they were just saying they're a bit appalled, because my impression is that they're actually blaming DI. So they're blaming DEI for Trump's assassination attempt and for the bushfires in California, and I guess the aircraft collision in Washington. So there are certain similarities to maybe, other previous wars where they're looking for scapegoats. But I will say, in terms of what you were talking earlier about getting onto committees, so in South Australia, I've been on interview panels for probably 20 years. So I think we have a good female representation in South Australia. And I've been head of department with Queen Elizabeth for 6 or 7 years. I've just handed it on. There was some angst when I started, but when the guys actually realized that if you're a good head of unit, it actually involves work and it's not just a title to put on your CV, then they weren't as interested. But the interesting thing I'm saying is, in terms of trainees, the guys who are supervisors of female trainees are frightened now to give any negative feedback because they're worried about backlash. So as head of department, I just said to them, if you feel like you're uncomfortable as a male supervisor of training with a female trainee, just invite me to be in the room, and I'm happy to share. So I think it is something where there's male supervisors of training and female trainees that I can see some of these issues coming up. So I think if there are women in the department, it would be good if they supported and got involved when they had those interactions.
Right. Thank you. I was just going to say to Margaret, as an honorary general surgeon now from the Northern Sydney Health District, I guess there are about 15% of fellows are female, and Northern Sydney's got about 16%. So people would sort of say proportionally that
Yeah. You mean fellows? Yeah, I see what you mean.
Fellows, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
right. So we reflect the fellowship. Yeah.
we are reflecting the fellowship. Um, but I guess for me, if I was to compare, say, New South Wales with, say, Victoria, especially when it came to something like vascular, we have really few um, females in major teaching hospitals, um, generally in New South Wales. And there just seems to be more in Victoria, and there seems to be more heads of department in Victoria, female heads of department, from what I sort of anecdotally know. And I think that's because in Victoria they do have a competitive application for head of departments, which we don't tend to have in New South Wales. New South Wales tends to be a little bit of a tap on the shoulder. The oldest person gets there. Is this something that we really need to actively look at? And I know we've talked about this in the committees, but about actively making sure that all heads of department um, uh, is is not just a tap on the shoulder, but is actually an active application.
Yeah, I mean, we actually talked about this today. It's going to be one of the things we work on because head of departments, it may work differently in different states, but it is a sort of an EOI process, but it's not a very sort of active process. And the other thing is the incumbent can stick around forever. So our idea is have it as a fixed term. Like, you can only be, even in the United States, the president, well, it might go longer than 8 years, but, at the moment it's a maximum of 2 4-year terms. Well, heads of department in our institution are for 3 years, and we're going to propose that it's 2 by 3 years, and that's it. And so it has to rotate. And, I think as well, looking at gender and saying, well, it's time to have a female, you've never had a female head of department, so being a bit more active about it, I think that will make a difference. And I will also say, all of the people here probably know that women surgeons have better outcomes. And I think we need to be a little bit better at promoting that, or, certainly we don't have worse outcomes. So for hospitals and departments, if you want to get really good surgical outcomes, you should be appointing more women. So, we have to get away from this mindset of, we have to have a woman to balance out the gender or whatever, and there'll be a liability. No, we will make the department better in so many ways. And I will say I'm kind of indirectly proud of the fact that because I've been around for a long time, our department, colorectal, and our rooms, we're now 50-50 women in our group. Upper GI, for example, a similar surgical department has never had a female surgeon. So I do think that trainees who rotate through, they see women surgeons and they think, oh yeah, I can see myself doing that. Or, we have things in our grand rounds. Last night, someone said, oh, the surgeon needs to know what he can do. And I'll say he or she, like just little things like that you kind of pipe up. And I think that makes a difference. And finally, I'm just going to say something that Linda Ferris has just messaged me to say, did we know each other from high school? Well, Linda, we did. And I think our high school, which was Chatswood High, a local comprehensive high school, has had 4 female surgeons. And I suspect that might be perhaps a record for a comprehensive high school, or perhaps any high school. So yes, Linda, you were an inspiration to me. And we did know each other like 55 years ago. So 50 years ago, but we can maybe catch up offline. Yeah, so you were a mentor to me all that time ago. I followed your career. I know, that you're in Canada and a very pioneering orthopedic surgeon. So yeah, what you see does influence you.
That's fantastic. I was just going to say we've only got a few more minutes. If there's any burning questions, you have to ask them now. I think one of the things that I really like about these sessions is actually getting to meet our senior female surgeons. I do say to my medical students that when I was going through as a registrar, that I didn't have a single female surgeon at the hospital where I trained. And it was actually only when I went to Singapore that I actually worked with a female surgeon for the first time. And what was really interesting was that my male professor, it was the first time ever that I was actually treated really equitably. Like I wasn't a female registrar or whatever. I was just treated like a registrar. And one of the reasons for that was that he had actually trained under the first female vascular surgeon in the UK. And so he'd been trained and he basically thought that she walked on water. and Avril Mansfield, and he thought she was fantastic. So so for that reason, he just basically treated me just like anything and sent me off to do all kinds of stuff. And that was really fantastic for me. And I think that's one of the things about having more and more women coming through so that both, male and female trainees actually see this as the norm. It's really important. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so great to have people like Deborah and Margaret, who are senior consultants who are really trying to make things better for the women that are following. And I think that's one of the really great things about these sessions. Linda?
Oh, just oh, I know. So in terms of bequests, so one of the things in terms of setting up my will, I know some of you have kids who you need to give money to if they're going to buy houses in Sydney, but I don't. So what I've done with both the AOA and the college, and I did discuss this with my female trainees at the time, is I've made a bequest that it should go to the best female trainee until there is gender equity, and then it can go to either gender. So that way it's sort of affirmative action for females, but it's not discriminating against the males. So I thought, and that was so that they could go to pay their way to go to a major surgical meeting. Because I think if you're going to start a career, that kind of thing can be helpful. So I do think you don't want to discriminate against the guys, but you want to be pro the women until there's equity.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Linda. I think that's a great way of doing it. I think we might, if there's no more questions.
Can
Oh, yep, Deborah.
I'm listening about those two younger female surgeons in Darwin. If they want someone else to talk to, I'll be happy to put my hand up. I'm quite good at being an agony aunt. I've got quite a bit of experience at it now. If anyone thinks that that's useful, because sometimes it does help to just speak to someone else who's outside the institution, because then you don't have to worry about maybe confidentiality, etc. And an independent person can be really useful at times.
Thanks. I'll certainly talk to them about that.
Okay.
And I just want to say to anyone that's actually listening to this webinar who is either on here now or watching it later, if you are actually having any issues at all and you do want to talk to a senior female surgeon, you can either get in touch with Women in Surgery and we can try and get you in touch with contacts. Sometimes when you're working in a small hospital, you may not know who's around. And we certainly, whether we're the Women in Surgery Committee, contacts within council, we can put you in touch with people. We can put you in touch with Deborah, who's volunteered to help lots of people. And so please don't feel like you have to be alone and that, there are people that can help you. And I think one of the things is the fact that when something bad is happening, you do feel really isolated. And it's really important to know that you are not alone and that there are people, even if it's just to talk to someone and get some advice. And it's really useful sometimes to just reframe the situation that you're in and to look at different alternatives that you may not have thought about. So I think on that note, I am going to call an end to this. I just want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Deborah and Margaret, for great talks. And thank you to everyone who's commented, Danette and to Linda and to Gillian. Thanks for being part of the discussion. Thanks to everybody for joining us. I hope you have a great evening. And we'll be in touch with our next session once it's all finalised. Have a great evening. Good night, everyone.